The DC Extended Universe is the main live-action DC universe in the movies, created as an attempt to answer Marvel's cinematic universe, beginning with Man of Steel in 2013, and now, 10 years later, coming to an end with the release of The Flash, which will officially reset the timeline, creating what is now known as the DCEU, led by James Gunn and Peter Safran. That being said, since the DCEU is soon coming to an end, I thought it would be a great time to look back at every DCEU project and list off every DC superhero who appeared, or at least were confirmed to exist in this universe, before the release of The Flash, but this video should remain relevant after the movie's release as well, basically till the end of time. Since the DCEU is coming to an end, there won't be more heroes added to the universe, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's begin with the heroes introduced in the first movie, Man of Steel, starting with the titular character, Superman. Clark Kent, aka Kal-El, also known as Superman, was played by Henry Cavill and appeared in Man of Steel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, as well as both versions of Justice League, and on top of that has a staggering amount of cameo appearances, one in Shazam where you don't see his face, one on Peacemaker where he's just completely a silhouette, and finally in the end credits of Black Adam where his grand return was confirmed, but that ended up being his final appearance as the character, or at least in new footage. Superman, like a lot of the earlier DCEU heroes, was based on the New 52 version of the character, with a costume design that is inspired by the New 52, with a lot of added elements to make it more Kryptonian or alien, plus a black variant based off of the black suit from Reign of the Superman. Superman, who's a founding member of the Justice League, was alive prior to the timeline erasure, having been resurrected from the dead by a combination of a mother box, the regeneration chamber, and the Speed Force. Also technically debuting in Man of Steel is John Jones, aka the Martian Manhunter, disguised as General Calvin Swanwick, which is a completely original character, played by Henry Lennox, which is how he appeared yet again in Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, before finally revealing his Martian form in Zack Snyder's Justice League exclusively in that version, although considering this only happened in that version of the movie, it isn't actually officially confirmed that he is actually Martian Manhunter in the Justice League version of the timeline, which seems to fit better with the subsequent DCEU releases. The DCEU truly became a cinematic universe for good or for ill, with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which saw the debut of all of the other founding members of the Justice League, including the other non-Superman titular character from this movie, Batman, aka Bruce Wayne, played by Ben Affleck. Batman, who's largely inspired by the version of the character from The Dark Knight Returns down to the costume, would go on to appear in Suicide Squad, Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and finally, The Flash. This version of Batman also canonically had one sidekick, as the Bat Family doesn't really exist in this universe. That one sidekick is, or actually was, Dick Grayson, aka Robin, who never actually appeared in the DCEU, but was confirmed to exist through his Robin suit, which showed up in BVS, and the mention that Robin was killed by both Joker and Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad. You would probably think that the Robin who was killed by the Joker was Jason Todd, and in fact there was an official prop on the set of Suicide Squad that mentioned that Jason was Robin, but this never actually showed up in canon, and Zack Snyder officially confirmed that the deceased Robin from BVS was in fact Dick Grayson, with a costume which actually has like short shorts, which is so out of place for this universe, but we never actually saw it in action anyway. Like I mentioned earlier, BVS also introduced every other founding member of the Justice League in this universe, the one with the biggest role in this movie, and arguably the biggest role in the entire DCEU out of any character, is Diana, aka Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot, who would go on to appear in Wonder Woman, Justice League, Wonder Woman 1984, Zack Snyder's Justice League, Shazam: Fury of the Gods, and The Flash, plus a silhouette cameo on Peacemaker, which is, I'm pretty sure, the most amount of appearances, if you don't count like individual episodes for like characters from Peacemaker, that a character has in the DCEU. Wonder Woman, and especially her backstory, are based on the New 52 version of the character, where she was not made out of clay, but instead just the daughter of Zeus. More importantly, I would say this version of Wonder Woman had a much bigger impact on the perception of the character compared to the other two members of the Trinity and most of the characters in this universe, as the costume created for her, which debuted in BVS, and a version of which would go on to appear in every subsequent appearance, will be used as the basis basis for the costume that Diana would wear in the comics since Rebirth in 2016, and still does to this day. Wonder Woman is alive in the main timeline prior to the timeline change, but was dead in the nightmare future. Debuting in emailed footage in BVS are the 3 remaining founding members of the Justice League, starting with Victor Stone, aka Cyborg, who's definitely the founding member of the Justice League who went on to have the least important role in this universe, considering if you count BVS for Batman, he's the only character who never got his own movie, and in fact, aside from BVS, would only go on to appear in the 2 versions of Justice League. Played by Ray Fisher, Cyborg is fully based off of the New 52 version of the character, down to the apocalyptic tech origin story and the 95% 5% human design, as opposed to the more human design he had before the New 52, and even a bit since. Then there's Aquaman, also known as Arthur Curry, played by Jason Momoa. Aquaman appeared in cameos in both Batman v Superman and more recently Peacemaker, as well as large or main roles in Justice League, Aquaman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, where it was confirmed he would die in the nightmare future alongside Wonder Woman. Aquaman remains alive and well in the main timeline though, and in fact, based on Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the sequel to Aquaman releasing after The Flash, it's very possible that Jason Momoa will remain as Aquaman into the new timeline. I'd say that fully depends on the box office success of The Lost Kingdom. If it isn't successful, they might just say it happened in the pre-Flashpoint timeline, and that will mean it will be the final movie in the DCEU. Aquaman seems to be based on a mix of the 90s shirtless badass persona and the cooler, slightly revisioned version of the character from the New 52. For a bit of personal opinion, I think the Aquaman suit is one of the single most perfectly adapted comic book outfits to live action of all time. It looks fantastic. The same can't really be said for the Flash, also known as Barry Allen, played by Ezra Miller, who rivals Superman for the single most amount of cameos in this universe. Unlike Superman though, his actor appears in every single one of them. After his debut cameo in BVS, he cameoed in Suicide Squad, he cameoed in Peacemaker, and even before Peacemaker, he technically also cameoed in Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is where he finally canonically got the idea for the name Flash from Grant Gustin's version of the character, taking place after his appearances in either Justice League or Zack Snyder's Justice League, depending on which one the Flash movie acknowledges, if it acknowledges either at all. Finally, like Wonder Woman and Aquaman before him, the DCEU version of the Flash will be the focus of the first live-action movie about their character. The version of Barry Allen doesn't really seem to be based off of any version of the character from the comics, at least not in personality or look, but his backstory comes from Flash Rebirth, explored further in the New 52, and his suit from the movie is based on the New 52 suit. His original suit, however, is a complete reimagining of the Flash design. Getting past that big Justice League hero dump brings us to Suicide Squad, and when it comes to these movies, I'll be counting only characters who are heroes in the comics, or characters who are unequivocally heroes and not characters like Harley Quinn or Deadshot, who became reluctant heroes or maybe anti-heroes as members of the Suicide Squad. This leaves us with 2 characters debuting in the first Suicide Squad, including Rick Flag, played by Joel Kinnaman. Rick, who's the field leader of Task Force X, would go on to appear in the Suicide Squad, where he would die at the hands of Peacemaker, which would become a large plot point going forward on the Peacemaker show, and maybe also Creature Commandos. It seems very likely that that specific event will remain canon into the new DCU timeline, considering his father, Rick Flag Sr., will be brought into that world on Creature Commandos. Rick Flag probably would have survived the Suicide Squad if Katana was there to have his back. Tatsu Yamashiro, played by Karen Fukuhara, appears only in Suicide Squad with the New 52 inspired design that would be incorporated into the comics, and a very fleshed out backstory or personality that does come from the comics. Katana unfortunately does nothing in the DCU, basically appearing only in Suicide Squad and having like one line. I can't actually remember any lines, only Rick Flag's line talking about Katana. Following Suicide Squad is Wonder Woman, which does not debut its title character, nor do any significant heroes appear aside from her, but there are all the other Amazonians, a few of which I did consider for this video, like Artemis, played by Anne Wolfe, who seems to be based off of Artemis of Bana Migdal, who replaced Diana as Wonder Woman for a time, and more recently is an important member of the Outlaws, alongside Red Hood and Bizarro. She doesn't really look anything like Artemis, but I guess it counts. Artemis has since appeared in Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 1984. Another character who has replaced Diana as Wonder Woman in the comics is her mother, Hippolyta, who is played by Connie Nelson and debuted in Wonder Woman, but would go on to appear in Justice League, Wonder Woman 1984, and Zack Snyder's Justice League as well. And speaking of Justice League, there are clearly two different versions of this movie, with both minor and major differences, including certain characters who only appear in one specific character who is very different from each other in both. That character who is different is Mera, played by Amber Heard, speaks with an American accent in Justice League, but a British accent for some reason in Zack Snyder's Justice League, where she's seen to be an important part of the nightmare future where Aquaman is dead. This is one of the key signals towards the Snyder Cut not being canon, since in her only other appearance, Aquaman, Mera speaks with an American accent. Mera will also appear in Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, but I don't think that movie's success matters as much for Amber Heard, who probably will not be playing Mera going forwards regardless. Something that's noticeably missing from the DCU is the Green Lantern Corps. There were plans for Jon Stewart being played by Wayne T. Carr, there were plans for Hal Jordan appearing in Justice League sequels, and there was a planned Green Lantern Corps movie, but with the DCEU now coming to an end, the Green Lantern Corps of this universe never came to fruition, and we only saw two Green Lanterns cameo, and neither of them were humans. There was Yalan Gore, the Green Lantern of Sector 2814 from thousands of years ago, who cameoed in both versions of Justice League, where he was killed in a flashback by either Steppenwolf or Darkseid, depending on the version. Going from past to future, we see a deceased Kilowog cameo in the Nightmare future, seemingly having been killed by a brainwashed Superman. Neither Lantern has an actor associated with them, neither has any lines, and both are now dead. Although, I guess it can be assumed that Kilowog is alive somewhere out there in the main timeline, as the Nightmare future hasn't happened. Appearing only in Zack Snyder's Justice League is Ryan Choi, who is the Atom in the comics, the third Atom in fact, after Ray Palmer and before him Al Pratt. Played by Kai Zhang, Ryan is an employee of Star Labs, but only appears in a cameo in just this movie. However, I'm assuming if the Snyderverse continued, Ryan would have probably become the Atom, probably not Ray Palmer, who we don't see in this universe, like how Ant-Man in the MCU was Scott Lang, skipping over Hank Pym. The DCU definitely became more aimless after Justice League, but this also did lead to the universe expanding a bit more past just that team. This isn't true for the next movie, Aquaman, as no new heroes debuted in that movie, but it is true for the movie after that, Shazam. All the heroes introduced here are the Shazamly members, including the main character Billy Batson, played by Asher Angel, as well as the other main character who's a completely different person, known as Shazam, played by Zachary Levi, both of whom have appeared exclusively in Shazam and its sequel Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Shazam's suits and backstory are inspired by the New 52 take on the character, which is where this particular expanded Shazam family comes from, past Mary and Freddy, and this includes Pedro, played by DJ Cortana as the hero, and Jovan Armand as the kid, Darla, played by Megan Good as the hero, and Faith Herman as the kid, and Eugene, played by Ross Butler as the hero, and Ian Ched as the kid, all of whom have appeared in Shazam and Fury of the Gods. The two remaining members of the Shazamly have been around for just about as long as Shazam / Captain Marvel has in the comics, but are also based off of their New 52 interpretations. This includes Mary Bromfield, also known as Mary Marvel in the comics, played by Grace Fulton as both the kid and the hero in the sequel, but by Michelle Borth as the hero in the first movie. Finally is Freddie Freeman, who in the comics is known as either Captain Marvel Jr. or Shazam Jr., and is played by Adam Brody as the hero and Jack Dillon as the kid. All of these characters appeared in Shazam and Shazam! Fury of the Gods. There is technically one more character who's kind of a hero who kind of debuted in this movie, and that's Black Adam, who's seen in his CGI presentation, not yet given an actor, before being given one in his own movie where he's played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. This is a very weird case because not only is Black Adam not a hero in the comics, but in his own movie he mentions constantly that he's not a hero, but actions speak louder than words, and he's basically just a hero in his movie. All of his actions point to him just being a good guy, and also he has zero connection to Shazam at that point because The Rock really wants to fight Superman for some reason. Anyway, yeah, Black Adam, technically a hero in this universe. The next movie following Shazam is Birds of Prey, Prey, also known as Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, also known as Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, which saw the debuts of a few female heroes and members of the Birds of Prey with varying degrees of recognizability to the comic character. First, there's the Huntress, aka Helena Bertinelli, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is definitely the most like her comic character. She even gets a sort of comic accurate costume at the end of the movie, although it definitely looks pretty cheap looking. Then there's Dinah Lance, aka Black Canary, played by Journey Smollett, whose singer occupation comes from the time in the New 52 era of the comics where she was the lead singer of a band called the Black Canary. Black Canary's look and costumes, however, are a complete reimagining of the character, who also in this universe has never met Green Arrow as far as we can tell, a character who we never see, but is mentioned, and I'll get to him later in the video. Cassandra Cain is played by Ella J. Bosco, who in the comics has been known as Batgirl, Black Bat, and Orphan, who's a master assassin trained from birth in combat, but never taught to speak, while in the DCEU she is a street rat thief without any combat abilities, who you can never imagine being Batgirl. There's reimagining a character like Black Canary, and then there's just making a completely new character and giving them the name of a comic character. Cassandra Cain falls into the latter. Finally, for Birds of Prey is Renee Montoya, played by Rosie Perez, who in the comics eventually becomes the Question. She didn't become the Question in Birds of Prey, but she is a member of the team regardless, so she definitely should be considered for this video. Wonder Woman 1984 didn't technically debut any comic book heroes, but there is a character who I think was supposed to become a hero, possibly in a potential Wonder Woman 3, that being Asteria, who appeared in like a cameo or two in Wonder Woman 1984, played by Linda Carter. One thing I'm glad never came to fruition is Wonder Woman 3, directed by Patty Jenkins. It probably would have been as bad as Wonder Woman 1984. This brings us to the Suicide Squad, a team that mostly consists of villains and criminals, but a few of them are either heroes in the comics, or one of them, I'd argue, is heroic enough to be considered for this video. That character is Ratcatcher 2, aka Cleo Caso, played by Daniela Melchior. This character is actually a mostly original character who's the daughter of a very minor Batman villain named Ratcatcher. She can maybe be considered an adaptation of Ratcatcher, but regardless, I would consider her a hero by the end of this movie, just based off of her actions and intentions. I wouldn't have necessarily said the same for Peacemaker, who is a hero in the comics, but by the end of this movie feels like a villain. But then Peacemaker came out and at least partially redeemed him. Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, played by John Cena, is maybe the character with the single most screen time in the DCEU, considering he's the main character of the only TV show and a prominent character in one movie. Peacemaker and John Cena in that role is basically guaranteed to remain into the new timeline, and most of the events he went through in the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker will probably remain mostly canon. In fact, there will be a Peacemaker Season 2 that will take place in the DCU. It's possible that the only thing that won't be canon from Season 1 is the Justice League cameo, which could be the same just with different actors. The only other character I'd consider for this video from the Suicide Squad is Corey Pitzner, aka TDK, or the Detachable Kid, who's played by Nathan Fillion and is based off of the Legion of Superheroes rejectee Arms Fall-Off Boy. He's seen as a bit of a joke character in both the comics and the movie, and is actually not the only Legion of Superheroes character that James Gunn somehow brought into the present day for whatever reason. The other one is Matter Eater Lad, who was mentioned on Peacemaker by Peacemaker in a way that implies that it is at least somewhat known as a hero operating in the present day instead of the far future. Peacemaker just made a big deal out of referencing heroes out of nowhere who weren't previously known to exist in this universe, like Dollman, who in the comics is a member of the Freedom Fighters, so this at least partially implies that the Freedom Fighters exist in the DCU as well. However, based off of how he's talked about on this show, it seems like only Peacemaker knows who he is, so I guess he's less famous than Matter Eater Lad and far less famous than Green Arrow, who is by far the biggest hero that Peacemaker confirmed to exist in the DCU and is talked about in such a way that basically everybody knows who he is. To the point where certain actions are known to be things that Green Arrow does. It is, however, unknown if he has any affiliation with characters like Black Canary or teams like the Justice League, although in my opinion both seem unlikely. It is also unlikely we'll ever see this version of Green Arrow on screen, ever. A few heroes actually debuted in Peacemaker as well, including the show stealer Adrian Chase aka Vigilante, played by Freddie Stroma, who, alongside Peacemaker, is very likely to remain in the new DCU timeline, which is great because Vigilante is great. While his costume is very comic accurate, the character himself is very different from the comics in that he's just a straight up sociopath, and not the DA or a lawyer of any kind. There's also Judo Master, played by Null E, with a completely different and original costume design and reimagined look in general. Judo Master is one of the few characters who was owned by Charlton Comics before they were bought by DC, alongside the likes of Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, and Peacemaker, which is probably one reason for why he was included on Peacemaker in the first place. That being said, he's more so a villain, or at least an antagonist, in his only DCEU appearance, although, like basically every other Peacemaker character, he's probably going to appear again in the DCU. This leaves just Eagly, who is a completely original character created for the show, who would then pretty quickly go on to appear in the comics as well. Eagly is a full-on CGI creation who Peacemaker considers his best friend. That brings us to what is not technically the final movie in the DCU, but is arguably the movie that officially finally killed any last hope for this universe, Black Adam of all things. Ironically though, despite killing the DCU, Black Adam also greatly expanded the universe, not with anything Black Adam related, although there are two characters that are related to Black Adam, but it was with the JSA where the universe truly expanded in this movie. The DCEU JSA has 6 confirmed members, including 2 retired members in Al Pratt aka Adam, played by Henry Winkler, who appeared in a cameo, not in costume, as well as Mahunkle aka Red Tornado, who's referenced in Black Adam but also appears in a tie-in comic. Both of these characters appear because their successors are members of the JSA in the present. There's Al Pratt's nephew Al Rothstein aka Atom Smasher, played by Noah Centennial, and Mahunkle's granddaughter Maxine Hunkle aka Cyclone, played by Quintessa Swindell, both of whom appeared only in Black Adam and are alive prior to the timeline change. This is also true for Carter Hall aka Hawkman, played by Aldous Hodge, who's the leader of the JSA, and also considering the ages of the other previous members of the JSA, Hawkman is likely a reincarnation of the Hawkman who was a member of that earlier team. And finally is Dr. Fate, also known as Ken Nelson, played by Pierce Brosnan, who appeared in Black Adam with this awesome costume just to die at the end in a pretty unspectacular way. I would not mind if the DCU reversed this, even if they have to recast the role, just because this costume is sick and I would love to see it again. There's also technically Adriana Tomaz, who in the comics is Isis, who's played by Sarah Sahi, as well as her son Osiris, who's actually her brother in the comics, who's played by Bodhi Sabinoy. Neither get powers or become heroes in this movie. The final movie prior to The Flash is Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which I guess introduces a new character who ends up being a hero in Anthea, played by Rachel Zegler, who, like her sisters, is a completely original character, with some original dimension warping powers, a character that is likely never going to be seen again in any form of media in the future ever, not even like a comic or something. She's an original character who debuted in a movie that is like the biggest flop in DC history. This is not going to be translated into anything ever. And finally for the DCU is The Flash. The Flash won't introduce any new heroes into the actual DCU timeline, but will create a new timeline based off of Flashpoint, which includes its own version of Bruce Wayne aka Batman, played by Michael Keaton, which is also seemingly the same Batman who appeared in Batman and Batman Returns. The original plan was for the timeline change to make him the main Batman of the DCU, appearing in the now cancelled Batgirl, but with the new changes in place, this is likely going to be this version of Batman's last appearance, at least for now. There's also this universe's version of Barry Allen, also known as The Flash, who's also played by Ezra Miller and who wears a spray-painted red batsuit seemingly inspired by the Red Death, who will at least begin as a hero in this movie where he actually becomes the Flash, but will likely become a villain at the end. Definitely tell me in the comments if that ends up happening. Finally is Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, played by Sasha Calle, whose costume and hair definitely makes her look more like a few other Supergirls from other universes who are the daughters of Superman as opposed to Kara Zor-El. She's also based on the Flashpoint timeline Superman, whose pod crashed in Metropolis and he was taken in by the government where he was raised mostly in solitude, the same as is going to be true for Supergirl in this movie. So that is technically it for the DCU, but there are a few more projects I think it's important to mention, including the aforementioned cancelled Batgirl movie, which was so ridiculously close to being finished that it's insane we'll never get to see it. Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, would have debuted in this movie in this post-Flashpoint timeline, played by Leslie Grace in a Burnside-inspired Batgirl suit. However, because this movie was cancelled, and because it's also not technically from the DCU timeline, Batgirl kind of doesn't actually exist at all. Also, I should mention that there are other characters who are mentioned in some supplementary material like Wildcat and Zatanna. However, all of those supplementary materials are questionably canon, so I decided not to include it. So to finish this video off, I'll be recapping every one of these heroes based on category, starting with the Justice League members, which includes only 6 characters, only the founding members: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, and Cyborg. Suicide Squad members who are heroes: Rick Flag, Katana, Peacemaker, Ratcatcher 2, and Arms Fall Off Boy, or the Detachable Kid. Shazam League members: Shazam, Mary, Freddy, Pedro, Darla, and Eugene. Birds of Prey members: Huntress, Black Canary, Cassandra Cain, and Renee Montoya. JSA members: Dr. Fate, Hawkman, Atom Smasher, Cyclone, Atom, and Red Tornado, and a long list of other heroes who are unaffiliated with any of these teams, including Martian Manhunter, Robin, Artemis, Hippolyta, Mera, Ryan Choi, Yalan Gore, Kilowog, Black Adam, Eagly, Vigilante, Judo Master, Dollman, Matter Eater Lad, Green Arrow, Isis, Osiris, and Anthea. In the Flashpoint timeline, there's Supergirl, Michael Keaton Batman, and Barry Allen #2. And finally, in some sort of other timeline that maybe spins off from the Flash, but also technically doesn't exist, there's Batgirl.